is KD an all-time great? And this is probably like part two of our first podcast, right? We're gonna work our way through all these players and have a chat about them and where we see them. And I guess KD is one that we've touched upon over some of our podcasts, and obviously when we talked about Brooklyn and things like that. And I think is an interesting case here, which is why I sort of thought let's talk about this one a little bit. I guess firstly, with a bit of his stats here, at the moment, his career averages 27 points, 7 rebounds, 4 assists. He's played like 900 games. He's had a pretty good career. Rookie of the Year, 1 MVP, 2 Finals MVP, 2 championships. Yeah, those stats alone. Yeah, if you never sort of heard this guy on social media, he's an all-time great for sure, right? But I think there's a few things here that, firstly, let's be clear. I don't think he's an all-time great. I think he's made a good business decision earlier in his career rather than later, which has worked out well for him. And so here's a little bit of, I guess, research that I had to put together that I looked up, I guess, to sort of talk about this with you tonight. There's this article. Okay, it was funny. I was Googling a little bit, and I knew the point that I wanted to make here, but I was like, all right, what can I find some information about this for? So firstly, I guess Carmelo projections, okay, at the moment compare him a little bit to Dirk, a little bit to Paul Pierce and LeBron. Okay, and it's interesting because obviously, all of those three comparisons, along with the others that are on the list there, all have won rings. Okay, and all have won championships. Okay, and all three of them are obviously legends in their own rights. Okay, obviously Dirk led that Dallas team to the ring. LeBron has led all his teams that have won a ring. He is the number one option. Head and shoulders. That's it. No argument. And obviously Paul Pierce, was Mr. Boston, obviously, until he was able to get KG and Ray Allen to come across and have that sort of great run and win that ring. But KD, as we all know, okay, went to Golden State, okay, and joined that team that had already won a ring, okay, and had come off 73 wins that season. Didn't get the job done, but he came across, and then obviously, by default, slotted himself into the number one spot. And Steph Curry said, "No worries," because he's Steph Curry, right? And picked up those 2 rings, and then he's obviously then left, after the loss to Toronto, in that series. And there was this article that I found when I was obviously looking up for info, and it was like the 20 greatest players never to win a ring. Okay, and he was number 4 on that list. KD was number 4 on that list on the 20 greatest players to never win a ring, and this was dated on the 2nd of June, 2016. Okay, and it was like, cool article. All right. So here's the funny thing. You like little conspiracies, right? Yeah. So KD must have read that article, right? Because on the 7th of July, 2016, he said, "You know what? Stuff this. I'm leaving OKC and I'm going to sign with the Warriors." Yeah. So literally 1 month after this article came out, where he's number 4, okay, as a greatest player, and the 20 greatest players that has never won a ring, was obviously names like Karl Malone, Charles Barkley, Patrick Ewing. I'm sort of picking players that sort of in our era a little bit. Obviously, there are other players that played before our era that obviously didn't get to win rings. And he obviously went to Golden State and he got himself that ring. He got himself 2 rings, don't get me wrong. Okay. So I'm saying, like I said at the start of this argument, that he made this business decision earlier rather than later. Which was a really smart one, I guess, because clearly he's not on that list anymore. There's no more articles after 2017 that he's the greatest player that never won a ring. All right, because he's definitely picked one up by joining the 73-9 Warriors after that season.
So, I mean, thinking about it a little bit since you posted, and I can see the merit to saying that he isn't an all-time great, and there's a lot of asterisks around the championship success. So I'm going to unpack it a little bit more. So what makes a great player, right? I think the general consensus is it's all about championship wins, right? So you've got to get to the championship, you've got to win the championship, and you've got to be the best player on that team to then be considered an all-time great. If we unpack that, how many all-time greats are there, right? And is it as simple as getting to the championship and getting finals MVP? Is that really the general gist of it? If you looked at someone like Andre Iguodala, we would not categorize that as the criteria because that's a little bit different. In KD's stance, he did get finals MVP twice on a stacked team and also, won the championship twice. So you can make a case and say, if that's the criteria, then he's ticked that box, he's fine. The career stats speak for himself. So I wanted to make a bit of a comparison towards Tracy McGrady. Funnily enough, he's played one more game than Tracy McGrady did in his career. Tracy McGrady's career, obviously, the Houston, Orlando stint is really where the stardom kind of flourished, but knee injuries derailed that, etc. The reason why I brought that in comparison is because I think the talent is there, a competent scorer. Everyone talks about the fact, he's 7 foot tall, essentially has, slick ball handling, can shoot really well. By a skill standpoint, he's an all-time great, right? And if you put him in different contexts, you put him down in the 60s, 70s, even 80s, even 90s, he is always going to be a prominent player, always an all-star, potentially competing for championships. And I think, as I've talked myself into this, what is an all-time great? And that's the hardest part to answer this. So, we want players to do it a very specific way. So technically speaking, Dirk Nowitzki, by I think the criterion you're trying to use here, is an all-time great because he stayed with the one team and he, developed his skill set and, ended up triumphing and, winning the championship, especially over a good team. And, great sports debate, but this becomes problematic. Think about Michael Jordan's 72-10 season. That was the same time that the league was expanding. So they did the draft and really diluted the talent pool and, get 72 wins. And there's a little bit of an asterisk to that. I think the hardest part is just evaluating, KD always talks about this, right? He gets really philosophical and it's like, you've just got to be present, you just got to appreciate what you're seeing in the moment and stop comparing. And I think there's some merit to that because his skill set, we might see again, but to then get the longevity, to get the triumphing over several injuries. Like we always talk about the Achilles injury and that he's come back and he looks exactly the same, but he had a Jones fracture quite early on in his career as well that, has derailed other people. Zion's lost in a season because of a Jones fracture, for example. So I think, is he an all-time great?
When you're sitting right on the fence right now. You're right on the fence right now, Nick. I don't even know which way you're going.
It's good. It's good podcasting is what that is. I think when the 100 best players come out, he will be on that list and well deserving because the skill set's there, the career accolades are going to be there. And if we stop fixating on, I guess, kind of contextualizing every single person's championship, we'll probably have a better time in general, right? Because we could do this all day. We could look at, well, Kobe doesn't get 3 championships because he was actually with Shaq for 3 of them. So we don't worry about that. And LeBron really teamed up with everybody for every championship. So maybe none of them count. And then do we ignore that Scottie Pippen was probably underpaid and, a prominent figure in his runs? We can keep unpacking this as time goes on, but, one team out of 30 makes the finals.
You're talking about the top 100 players of all time in the NBA. Obviously, the 75 were released for the 75th year anniversary recently, and I think is he a top 100 player of all time? Sure, okay, but that's probably not an all-time great conversation. Maybe to be more specific here, if we're going to say, is he a top 10 player? Yeah, 10 fingers, top 10 player, and I think here that I'm clearly saying he's not. Okay. In fact, I don't even know if he's going to be rated as a top 25. Okay, sort of player, because he just doesn't have that killer instinct. Okay, he's never demonstrated that killer instinct. He's had the opportunities. Okay, he's had the opportunities. He got to the finals with young Harden and obviously young Westbrook, and got swept in that finals. And then that was it because then Harden left, or they sent Harden away. Okay, then he was obviously a foot on the line or toe on the line in that series that they could have taken out the Bucks and gone to the finals, even though there were a little bit sort of injury, sort of concerns and stuff like that last year. But, his toe was on the line. And then over time, he had another chance there and he literally airballed that shot. Okay. That's a sort of, that's his legacy if you looked at that killer instinct. And we talk about those sort of things like clearly MJ and Kobe. You got to put him somewhere up in the top 10 easily. Okay, even LeBron, D Wade, and stuff like that we broke down as shooting guards and in how we top 5 shooting guards and back then was that sort of they brought a different sort of, I'll call it a bit of charm and obviously collaboration. The fact they came together and brought that together, it was a whole new thing that they sort of brought to the game, to the NBA, that they were willing to do that, and they were successful in that sort of sense. I think if LeBron had not won a ring with Cleveland, if he had not won a ring with the Lakers, you'd have to sort of question where LeBron sits. Okay, because obviously he came to Miami, Bosch came along as well, and they formed this sort of super team as it was back then, and they did win the 2 rings. But I think you need to consider the context of those rings that occur in that sort of way. Okay, so I think that's the whole part where you referenced Dirk. Dirk won it because he stayed with the Mavs for 20 years or 19 years it was. Okay, same with Tim Duncan, same with Kobe, same with MJ and that sort of stuff. Same with the Golden State Warriors. They built that team up organically, and they've become very successful in that sort of sense. It's a different narrative. Even like say Steph Curry, okay, by the time it's said and done, he'll be an all-time great. Regardless how many rings he wins, because he's changed the game. Okay, it's like this, 6'3" shooting guard. Everyone wants to shoot a 3 now. Steph Curry. What's KD? Another 7-footer that's highly successful. Don't we all say if we were 7 foot, we would also be professional basketball players? That's the point, right? If we were 7 foot tall, we would probably be, feel like we'd give ourselves a good chance to be a professional basketball player at least. Yeah, that's the whole thing. And like I said, I think he made the, correct. Don't get me wrong, but he's made a business decision here to come to the Warriors, and they wanted him to, because who wouldn't? Yeah, who wouldn't want a player like KD's ability? But he's made that decision earlier, okay, rather than later. Okay, if you think about players that picked up rings towards the end of the career, like Jason Kidd in Dallas, Gary Payton in Miami, Mourning obviously in Miami as well, KG obviously coming across to Boston after all those peak seasons in Minnesota, and they won a ring, okay, and they're considered great. Okay, they're not considered all-time greats, but they're considered great, and they're definitely not on the list of those players that didn't win a ring. Okay, just like T-Mac, just like Iverson, just like Reggie Miller. Okay, and I think the closest comparison right now that we're watching is Carmelo. All right, Carmelo will be one of the all-time greats that never won a ring that's currently active if he can't latch onto a team that gets it done in the next season or 2. Okay, but what if Carmelo had left New York for a contender, okay, instead of where he bounced around obviously after New York, okay, and he was trying to win that ring, and obviously had to sort of battle sort of the Warriors, the Cavs, coming up, and the Spurs at that sort of point as well, and that sort of era that he was in, that if these players had joined teams earlier, all right, it would have given them that chance to pick up that ring, and then they would have been taken off that list. And KD did that in 2017. He was taken off that list, and that has now obviously solidified that top 100 at a minimum. Okay, but as an all-time great, I don't think the only way he would get into that all-time great conversation if he can show that he can win a ring, okay, without in Brooklyn. But I just don't see it happening.
I think the issue is that if he wins a ring in Brooklyn, it'll be the same conversation of, well, he has Kyrie. I think, and one, I was hearing another podcast, but they talked about, if KD's foot isn't on the line and they send the Bucks home, they've won the championship last year. Because let's be honest, like, they would have torn through Atlanta, and much to my dismay, Phoenix obviously would have probably still choked the 4 games that they were going to choke, right? Because clearly something's happened in the Phoenix Suns' identity, that's their thing. They can't seem to close out a series when they're supposed to. So KD wins the ring last year in essentially a big toe situation, and I don't think anyone could criticize how we played in that series anyway. And we're having a different conversation. I think that's how fragile everything is. But, when we get specific about every context for a ring, like, what if Giannis never goes back to the finals? And that was it. And it's full of asterisks because KD almost eliminated him with the big toe.
Well, Giannis would put himself neck to neck with Dirk. I guess that would be the sort of comparison, right? He got his 1 ring.
But then how is like, this is where the issue is that do we just want people to do it in a specific way, and then it's almost like trying to fit them into a narrative box? Because the Warriors, for example, without KD, do we give them a lot of credit because they've built their franchise and they've drafted well and they've come going? Or is it now like, well, they're a dynasty, so they're supposed to win, and then they didn't win, right? We've talked about this. If the Warriors lose this one again, they're 3-3 in their dynasty, and then is it really a dynasty anymore? And I think it's the metrics of success is that percentile wise, 3% of the league wins a championship per season. And if you extrapolate that data and you look at the average career span of being like 4 years, the window to win a ring for anyone is so small, let alone the great players that are consistently in contention. And the reality is KD has been consistently in contention, assuming that he's not injured. He's in the playoffs. And, this season was the first bomb out. And, how much of that is him individually? Because he technically played his part. He struggled, but he struggled against a defense that's inadvertently went to the finals and made everyone else struggle. So, there's elements there. I know that I sound like I'm circling a little bit, but I think the hardest part is he's an all-time talent and he's had success in the league. What more do we want him to do to tick whatever criterion we have in our head?